Good morning, beautiful soul. I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are in this beautiful world. My name is Brooke McGuire, and if you are new to this channel, we have conversations where we get to reflect, we get to connect to one another's stories, and we get to learn more about ourselves and about this world, about humanity altogether. Because the more that we can learn, the more access to knowledge and information that we have so that we can make better choices for ourselves in this world and eventually to help impact one another's life positively. So today's conversation, we're going to explore a couple concepts that truly changed my entire life. I remember having this first realization of common sense isn't actually a universal thing. Common sense is very unique to every single individual. And why is that? I came over time to piece together this perspective that I call the emotional matrix. And so a lot of people who talk about, breaking out of the matrix, escaping the matrix, what I've come to understand is that you always have a matrix around you. It's a matrix of beliefs and perspectives. It's a matrix that includes the experiences that you've had and the things you've come to absorb as true from those experiences. So every single individual, even two people who come from the same household, have an entirely different emotional matrix. And I do believe that the two main impactors of a person's emotional matrix are their own personality, which can ebb and flow and change over time, and also the experiences and the circumstances that we go through, especially when we're young. As we know with a lot of neuro understandings, that until we're the age of 7, our brain is like a sponge. So we don't necessarily have power over what we're accepting as true. We are literally just experiencing life, and it's like we're having all these bricks building this emotional matrix around us, which affects how we perceive the world, which then affects how we interact with the world. So two people can hear the same sentence, and one person laughs, and another person is incredibly triggered. And that's because of this emotional matrix. So I'm just gonna check my notes, because when we talk about common sense, this is literally why there are so many arguments, and there are going to be disagreements no matter what, but constantly we have arguments, constantly we have wars going on, even between just two people, because we're coming from two completely different realities. We live in a reality of realities, and there are billions of realities within the one reality. And when we can begin to see life this way, it begins changing the way that we interact. We become less triggered in situations because we can understand, maybe the way I'm taking this means more about my experience and my emotional matrix than it does about what that person actually said. And maybe at the end of the day, you and that person just don't jive. Maybe you are incompatible in some way, and that's okay. The more that we, at least I believe, the more that we allow everyone to live in their own reality and we come back home to our own reality, then we can understand our emotional matrix more. We can make changes within ourselves so that we can see reality for more of what it actually truly is, which is far beyond the one reality, the one singular reality that we have accepted as true. And once we take ownership of our reality and we make those changes, it affects and it creates a ripple around us, because the way we're interacting with life then changes. And we regain our power, we regain our agency in order to do the work that we came to do here in the world, which is going to cause bigger and bigger ripples towards positive change. Again, that's at least what I believe. That's why I'm here on this channel, facing my fears every week, to have these conversations, because I believe they need to be had. So step one to understanding our emotional matrix, before we even get into that, is that we all have our own reality, and therefore we all have our own sense of common sense. And the more we understand that, the more better equipped we are in conversations where we get triggered to, instead of react to that person, we can say, what do you mean by that? Can you say that in a different way, because I want to understand what you're saying? Instead of fighting them or making that situation mean something about them, making it mean that they're a bad person, making it mean whatever our brain tries to make it mean. Because our brain and our nervous system are coded with all of these patterns, and that removes our agency and our authority over our own life. When we live in this state of fight or flight, where we're just constantly reacting to everything, instead of consciously understanding, this is an opportunity for me to understand another person better, to understand myself better, and therefore understand more about the world. That's how we can actually create change here, is when we understand more. We have more information that is actually, I don't want to say accurate, because it's still coming from our own bias, but it's more accurate than the perception we had from our conditioned emotional matrix. The emotional matrix affects the way we see things, because instead of seeing and living from our authentic truth, we're living from this conditioned set of beliefs and perspectives and traumas that we haven't had the tools and awareness to actually heal through. So I did make a little drawing here as we begin talking about the emotional matrix. Let me scooch closer. So, clearly I'm not an artist. So this is you or me. This is the individual. And this is your emotional matrix. That's been built brick by brick from every experience that you've been through. This is information coming in from outside. And it comes through your emotional matrix and it changes. So your emotional matrix is impacting the way that you receive information, the way that you're able to receive information. And so this emotional matrix is a lot of what is actually in your subconscious mind, which is the majority of what is wired into your brain. All the information that we've learned over our entire life, even things that we don't necessarily consciously remember. So with our emotional matrix, we have to become more conscious. And so that's where the whole framework of conscious evolution that I've talked about in other videos comes, because I think there's dogs and kids playing in the river with their dad, and that's so cute. I'm gonna try not to ADD get distracted. Gosh, where was I? With the emotional matrix, we can consciously come to understand ourselves more. So that's what the whole conscious evolution framework is about. It's about coming to consciously understand yourself, consciously take self-responsibility of yourself through this entire process. That is a journey. It's a continuous process that's constantly happening through our lives. And when we interact with it consciously versus it just happening, we can actually consciously evolve towards the type of person, the type of community that we want to create here on this beautiful planet. Or when we are unconsciously evolving or subconsciously evolving, we have all these patterns that are playing out that are literally generations long. a lot of what's in our emotional matrix is what we learned through our childhood experiences. And that's being impacted by another individual who parented you in some way. And that person has their own emotional matrix of how they learned to parent someone. Maybe how they learned that you're not supposed to feel your emotions, stop crying. Because they learned that from whoever parented them. And we have this continuous domino effect through many generations where it's like we're concretely programming into the next generation how that child should grow up in the world. And so it's very different if someone tells a child, stop crying, because that person learned for whatever reason that you're not supposed to cry. Sometimes that came from a genuine caring place because that parent learned when you cry, it actually creates more pain and destruction. Sometimes it comes from someone being so uncomfortable with their own emotions that they can't handle a child having emotions. But then that, no matter how that's playing out, it's very different from when a parent says, hey, baby girl, you're feeling some things, aren't you? That's okay. Why don't you just come here and sit with me? Why don't we go sit by the river? And then eventually we can play. And that child can learn a healthy relationship with their emotions. And I mean, emotions is one of my favorite topics because everyone in their own reality has learned something completely different about emotions. And like whether they suppress it for whatever reason, how they show up in the world until they learn something new is going to affect their entire experience. If they were taught to suppress their emotions so much that they are never honest with their emotions, that person may struggle with relationships for their entire life, or their entire life up until a situation hurts so deeply that they're faced with having to make a different decision. Maybe starting to go to therapy and understand themselves. Maybe watch videos like this on YouTube. There are so many people having conversations like this. And that is so supportive of each of us. And I believe we will all be drawn to what it is that's going to support us, that's going to help us learn more about ourselves, learn more about the world, and expand into that. And it's all a journey. So going back to the emotional matrix, it's like you have this bubble around you. And I used to believe when I first was understanding this philosophy that I was creating that we had to break out of our emotional matrix. But the truth is it's always going to be there. Our mind is always going to dictate how we perceive the reality that we're experiencing. And that's going to impact the way we see the entire world. That's going to impact our ability to connect to our innate gifts to be able to share that with the world. And I believe when we all connect back to who we truly are, when we connect back to those innate gifts, that's when the whole world is going to change for the better. And it is going to happen one by one by one. So the more of us that are having these conversations, the more of us that are reflecting on ourselves, the more of us that are making conscious changes. So when an old pattern comes up, we're faced with an actual conscious choice of, ooh, I can feel why I want to go back to that old pattern, but I know that that old pattern just creates pain for myself and the people around me. So I'm going to try something new. The more that we're facing all of this, I believe the better chance humanity has. Life is so simple, but at the same time, it is so complex. And when we can deeply understand that, I believe we have more access to detaching and allowing ourselves to see things from different perspectives. So when we're super, super triggered, we can detach and understand that there's a part of us from somewhere in our lives that is feeling all these feelings. And if I can detach, not by suppressing it or telling it it's wrong, detachment just means separating yourself so you can step back and look at it. So I'm going to detach and have a conversation and connect with this part. Because if we don't have relationships with all the different parts of ourselves, we can come to just try to cut these parts of us off, and they actually have information for us to understand ourselves better. When we extend love to these parts, it helps those parts to not forcibly take control. So if you've ever had an experience where you've reacted in a way that maybe you still carry shame or embarrassment to this day, or guilt, whatever it is, or maybe you carry fear about the fact that, like, what if I react like that again? The more that you allow these parts, even on a subconscious level, you allow these parts to take control, the less autonomy and agency you actually have over your experience. And so that's where we can detach from these parts of ourselves. And that's where we can learn more about, why does this part so deeply want to react in this way? It's because they're hurting more often than not. I've spent the last couple months really deeply doing parts work myself. And I mean, some of the protector aspects of me wanting to burn the world down because that's how she felt her whole life, that she was the one being burned to the ground, that she was the one not being listened to, not being heard. And she had very valuable feelings and emotions. And I believe that these inner aspects and the way that we treat them is also a mirror of our external relationships, because those parts of us will affect the way that we show up in relationship, the way that we show up in repair. Because life is not perfect. Life is not some like perfect movie where no conflict ever happens. Conflict happens, but it depends on, like, what do we do with that? How do we show up with that? Do we show up in conflict and just say, you're the bad guy, you're terrible, you're this, you're a narcissist, whatever it is, and we shut that other person out instead of having a conversation and listening to them? And now, I do believe there are experiences, there are relationships that sometimes we do just have to step away, truthfully. But the more that you can consciously connect with yourself through those experiences and make those decisions from an authentic place, because you've given yourself the space to do that instead of doing it from a conditioned response. So recently, like, I had these protector aspects where I literally wanted to cut off one of my closest friends because we, in our two realities, were not jiving, and I did not feel heard and I did not feel considered. And that was true. And we are in repair and we're having conversation about that. But there's other layers that we're going to have to continue talking about so we can better understand ourselves, so we can better support one another even when we're in conflict. Because that's what love is. When you love someone, you want to consider them. And maybe you don't know how to consider them because of your own traumas. And so that's why these situations can then offer us a new opportunity to approach life differently. Whereas I've also had situations in the past where I have removed people from my life because I could tell we are just incompatible. We are not on the same page. We do not want the same things. We want a completely different lifestyle, and that's okay. We can acknowledge that without judging one another for that. And so when we can do this consciously, it, for me at least, like, we can move forward in life with less regret. Because when we're reacting, and we're reacting from that like conditioned emotional matrix, before we clear out all the bullshit from the emotional matrix, we may come years later and have regrets about losing certain people in our lives or how we handled certain situations, because we weren't capable of actually connecting to our authentic truth of, I love this person and I want to work something out with them, but I just don't know how. Guess what? You can show up in a relationship and say that. And based on how they respond, if they're open to having conversation, there may be possibility for repair. And repair offers us immense growth. And if you really want to be the person that you were destined to be here on this planet, you have to face that shit. You have to be honest with yourself. And you have to be honest with the people that you deeply care about. That's what helps us understand one another better and be able to approach life that accounts for both of us. Instead of one person being so wrapped up, or both people being so wrapped up in their pain that they just fight and argue because each of them doesn't feel like they're being heard. What I have learned in my own experience is that if that's how you feel, most likely you are not listening to yourself. And that can be really hard to hear. I understand that. I have wanted to run for the hills away from that awareness myself, because it can feel very shameful to have to face the fact that the way I showed up also impacted this. Every relationship has two people, and both people have some sort of role to play. No matter how we're showing up in a situation, oftentimes there's something that we can do better. There's a way that we can actually communicate better, even just in one specific relationship. And the more that I show up to understand me, to understand you, the better that I can show up for you. And also without ignoring myself or bypassing my experience or dismissing my experience. I can show up for us in this relationship, whether that's a friendship, whether that's with a family member, no matter what it is. The more that we allow ourselves to reflect and allow ourselves to connect in these new ways, the more we open ourselves up to realize common sense isn't universal. And me getting pissed off and triggered because that other person did something in a way that I could never do, maybe that's actually an opportunity for me to open my mind a little bit. There's a reason that that person did that the way that they did it, whether I agree with it or not. And that can open space for more compassion. And that can open space for more understanding and more connection and more community. So the emotional matrix that we have is affecting the way that we're showing up. It affects the way that we talk to people or the way that we avoid people. It affects so much. And so how can we take one baby step today? Because change doesn't happen all at once. And if you've ever had a situation or a relationship where you have one conversation and you're like, great, we're on the same page, and now we keep moving forward without talking anymore about that thing, and we just act like everything is okay. Relationship is a journey. It's a continual conversation. It's a continual understanding of one another. And I believe the relationships that we are meant to be in are the ones where we genuinely want to understand you, and you genuinely want to understand me. And it doesn't mean there's not going to be disagreements, there's not going to be discomfort, there's going to be all of that. But there's also going to be the joy and the love and everything we've always wanted in relationship with other people. We just have to open ourselves up. We just have to look at life from a new lens. We have to see the world for what it really is, a reality of realities, and no one singular reality is true or better than another one. It's just different. And the more that we can open ourselves up that way and release judgment, the more change is actually possible. So let me just make sure there wasn't anything else I wanted to talk about today from my notes. Yeah. I'd really invite you today to let yourself sit with this. What shows up for you? Whether it's feelings, whether it's thoughts. And can you just observe it? Can you detach yourself from the judgment that you may have about it? And just see things. Because once you see things, then you open yourself up for change. And what I'd like you to reflect on today is you have learned what success, love, relationships, emotions, life, etc. You have learned what all that is supposed to be. So for example, the kid who has been so deeply influenced by their parent to be a doctor because that child has been so convinced that, like, if I'm a doctor, then that means I'm loved, and that means that I have reached success, and that means so much about my worthiness. It never had anything to do with that. That was one person's emotional matrix influencing yours, and being a doctor might not be the thing that actually makes you happy. It might actually be the thing that breaks your heart in the end. And there are so many different examples of just that one. Not everyone is raised to want to be a doctor. We're raised thinking so many other things that's connected to our worth, but that's not. You are inherently worthy the way that you are. You are inherently loved the way that you are. What's underneath all those layers of conditioning? And so, I want you to reflect on how much of what you learned about success, relationships, everything in your life, how much of that is actually true? Can you connect with your heart today for even just 5 minutes? Maybe go sit somewhere in nature. Maybe sit in your room. Just allow yourself to sit in silence for 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 1 minute, whatever you can do. It's one baby step. And this journey is one baby step at a time. Can you sit with that and see that? And maybe, can you even go beyond that? What is actually true for you? So one last example. I was raised not intentionally by anyone, but I learned through my experiences that I had to earn love. So I showed up in my masculine energy in my relationships, and I was constantly the giver, and I was constantly creating all the experiences, oh my gosh, experiences, there we go. And like, I would put together camping trips, and I would plan every single thing, and I never actually earned love. I just felt like I had to do that in order to earn love. If anything, that kept me in a relationship where that person wasn't meeting me because I was over and over and over giving. And the more that I have taken time to sit with myself and realize that I deserve to be loved like that, the less that I have given to relationships, and even if I'm not in a relationship now, I'm actually much more happy with my life. Do I still deeply desire that sort of connection? Yes. And I do believe I'll have that one day. But I've also been in a season of preparation, of learning about myself, of changing the way I show up even in my relationships with my family and with my friends. And that's going to allow me to show up as the whole version of myself with my masculine and my feminine side in a relationship with someone else. So every part of this journey is a baby step. And what is one baby step that you can take today? I love you so much. I wish you a beautifully aligned day, and I will talk to you in our next conversation.